Welcome in, everybody. Michigan State Spartans live on the Voice of College Football Network. I am your host, Ryan Elke. It's a beautiful Thursday. Can we say it's a beautiful Thursday, actually? For the people here in the Midwest, the Northeast, I'm hacking up that Canadian wildfire smoke all day, but we're surviving. We're living. We're surviving. I've been hacking up all that smoke, but we're here. It's a Thursday, and I have a fun show, at least for me, planned, because I was just thinking, who I haven't talked about in a while? My favorite Spartans growing up. The players that made me fall in love with Michigan State football. I was forced is, quote unquote, to watch the Spartans because of my father, but with the players I'm going to name, it's watching them that made me fall in love with MSU football and, kept coming back. So we're going to play the favorite game of just guys naming dudes. And it's going to be dudes that I loved watching growing up that were my favorite players. Some names that, are everyone's favorite players that we'll touch on. And, some that, you probably haven't heard in a while, and those are the fun ones to kind of talk about, of why do you like that person, or I haven't heard that name in forever. And then so we'll touch on some of those as well. And if you have your own favorite player, the player that you first watched, whether you're on campus or you saw them on TV, you're watching with your family, the first Spartan you saw on TV is like, oh yeah, this is my guy. Drop it in the comments. Like and subscribe to the show. Our show's every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. as we get through the off season. As we approach the season closer, we'll add a third show to the week, but we'll unveil those plans as we get a little closer, because we are 50 days out. 50 days out from college football, from Michigan State football. And it's beautiful. If you're still craving more Michigan State football, we have the College Football 27 Michigan State simulations going on the channel right now. Michigan State and the Voice of College Football Network. We have the first two games. So we have Toledo and Eastern up there now. Notre Dame, the game 3 drops this weekend. I believe that's when it's scheduled to come out. So if you're looking for just to have some Spartan football on your TV, or maybe after our tonight's conversation, you'll be watching highlights of the guys, I'll be naming here. But before we dive into guys naming dudes from Michigan State, your first favorite Spartan, let's touch up on the news. What's going on in the Michigan State world, the college football world? First with Michigan State, Tico Duckett named to the Michigan State Hall of Fame. We'll be mentioning that family name here coming up in a little bit. But one deserving player who I believe gets undervalued, it's not Michigan State football, but a player who gets undervalued a lot in the Michigan State world, Kalen Lucas. Kalen Lucas making the Michigan State Hall of Fame. Orchard Lake St. Mary's National Player of the Year. It's because how his senior season ended with the injury and falling short of what could have been another title run for Tom Izzo, but Kalen Lucas getting the love and the appreciation from Michigan State is always nice to see. If we were doing basketball players, first favorite Spartans, it wouldn't be first on there because I'm a little older, experienced the 2000 team, as a child. So obviously the 2000 team would be up there, but Kalen Lucas, that man was a walking bucket. He was special. So congrats to Tico Duckett, congrats to Kalen Lucas, congrats to the other inductees to the Michigan State Hall of Fame. And the other news that we kind of touched on earlier in the week, that's been the biggest news in college football of the week, and that's the University of Michigan. That team a little south of us. They had their Board of Regents meeting today, and what happened? What I believe I said on Tuesday, nothing happened. They didn't even discuss athletics. They didn't discuss Ward Manual. They they do what they do. They try to push it under the rug, and hopefully we'll all forget in a week or two. That's just what happens. That I mean, did we expect anything more? Did we expect accountability? Of course not. So that'll wrap up the news. We don't need to dive too much on what's going on, south of us. But congrats to Tico Duckett, congrats to Kalen Lucas. But we'll dive into the segment of the day, the big segment of the day, and that is your first favorite Spartan. Because, with everyone that's listening, watching, and whether you're watching at a later date, still drop it in the comments. I'm still want to see who everyone's first favorite Spartan was, because we all grew up in different times. So there's different guys that we all fell in love with first. For me, I'm in my mid 30s, so I grew up, in the 90s, early 2000s is when I started watching Michigan State football. And the first, I'd say first three guys, because they're in the same time era of that late 90s Nick Saban-esque teams. So I will start with the running back first, just because he started at the school first. That was number 33. That was Cedric Irvin. That man was a beast. The first MSU running back fall in love with, it was hard to not put him here on the list of, ended up being a Detroit Lion. But, 1,000 yards each of the 3 seasons he was at Michigan State, over 3,400 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 35 rushing touchdowns, 41 total touchdowns. So Cedric Irvin is going to be on this list, no doubt. But we're going to have to dive into his teammates. So Cedric Irvin was from 96 to 98. And it was probably the 98, 99 teams that I remember the most, at least watching wise, remember the most. So I had to go with 2 of his teammates of players that I really fell in love with. And first we'll touch on the main man, Plaxico Burress. I mean, the dude was an absolute stud. I mean, 2 years at Michigan State, 1,000 yards his first year, almost 1,000 yards his second year, 17 total touchdowns. And what you cannot forget is that 99 game beating Michigan 34-31. Man explodes for 255 yards. It's a shame that we'll have to see his son play against Michigan State this year, as his son went off to Notre Dame. But I feel like for Spartan fans my age, like Plaxico Burress and Cedric Irvin are like the 1A, 1B of first players you fell in love with, especially to see, Cedric Irvin, able to handle, some time in the NFL, but Plaxico Burress exploding on the scene with Pittsburgh. We all remember his first career catch in the NFL, where he makes like this sliding catch across the middle, stands up and spikes the ball, but he wasn't touched. So it was a fumble and it was a turnover. And that was kind of the story of Plaxico Burress's NFL career. It's just like, oh, there's something really cool and there's something really boneheaded, all in the same moment. As we all know, Plaxico Burress is off the field story of getting hurt. But the highlight of his NFL career is catching those touchdowns to ruin the Patriots' perfect season as a New York Giant. So Cedric Irvin, Plaxico Burress off of those 98, 99 teams. And then there's one more player. Like, I looked up his stats. I thought maybe I had Plaxico and this other guy, reversed in my mind of what they did against Michigan in that game. Because the player I keep remembering is Gary Scott. Like, Gary Scott, wide receiver for Michigan State. I thought he had a huge game against Michigan. He had a solid game against Michigan in that 99 season. 5 receptions, 76 yards, a tutty. But I just remember Gary Scott just making some moves on that field. And just going to school the next day, like, oh yeah, Gary Scott torched y'all, and really it's Plaxico Burress. I mean, but I was also like 9 years old, trying to talk smack. Growing up in Oakland County, Michigan, there's plethora of Michigan fans around me, and I finally got to puff my chest out and talk some smack, and so I was laying it thick with these three guys, with Irvin, Gary Scott, and Plaxico Burress. But these were the first three Spartans, that I was hook, line, and sinker after this. And, those are ones that, at least for fans my age, a little older, those were the dudes that that we thought would turn the Spartan team around. Then Nick Saban flees to LSU, and we're stuck with the Bobby Williams era of teams. But I'm going to keep moving on, though, because there's a few Spartans I want to mention. They're not all going to be, 98, 99. Like, there's some heavy hitters here that, not only when we, watch these players, we got to see them grow and, help, for me, like, kept me hooked in on Spartan football. So following Cedric Irvin after he leaves, we get TJ Duckett. I mean, number 8, catching the touchdown to beat Michigan, the back of the end zone on the broken play, or as Michigan fans will bring it up, oh, Spartan Bob, stop the clock, Spartan Bob, stop the clock, because it's never a game lost. It's it's something screwed them over of why they lost the game. So TJ Duckett was just he was a bowling ball. I mean, that's, you either want one of two running backs. You want the guy that's lightning fast, or you want the thunder, you want the lightning. And with Duckett, we got the thunder, bowling over people. The dude was just a stud, had a very nice NFL career, mostly with the Atlanta Falcons. It escaped my mind if he jumped on some other teams at the end, but TJ Duckett was just that lovable running back who just run people over. And growing up, like, perfect segue off of Cedric Irvin, finishing up in 98. Duckett comes in the next year, his freshman year, but his sophomore and junior year, going for 2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns in those 2 years. But it became those guys of the next wave of people. So we had Irvin, Plaxico, for me, Gary Scott, then Duckett comes in, and then we get the combo of Jeff Smoker and Charles Rogers, had 68 catches, 13 touchdowns. Like the dude was amazing. Rest in peace, All-American for Charles Rogers. And the most memorable play, obviously, of Charles Rogers was the scissor kick touchdown on the back of the end zone. And rewatching it a few times, obviously I've glorified that in my head over the years, because I swear when he made that catch, I swear his legs were up like a rocket. Like, I swear he went full extension both. It was mainly just a mere like shuffling of the feet in air, but to land, I think it's that left foot in the end zone, just right in front of the out of bounds line. But it was, we had Plax, it was great. Cedric, it was great, but Charles was like, he was the dude of college football. I mean, getting drafted by the Lions, early on, and being in the Madden commercials, and then even went to Charles Rogers' first pro game at the Lions, and we were all excited for Charles Rogers. And I remember Harrington was the quarterback, I believe, threw one, ended up like going off the goalpost, but Charles Rogers dove across after it hit the goalpost and caught it, and we all started up screaming. We knew it was an incomplete pass, but just to see him make that athletic of a play, And that game ended up, we thought it was going to be the breakout game for Charles Rogers. It ended up being a breakout game for another elite wide receiver. Is for the Arizona Cardinals. It was Anquan Bolden's first game, and he just torched the Lions. And but it, memory we will never forget Charles Rogers and how we felt watching him in the green and white, and in those different uniforms that had like the weird white stripes on the shoulder pad, the smaller font, that like lighter green, like that early 2000s type design. So we got one comment here. From my father, enjoyed watching Gibby playing football during my time at MSU. So yeah, watching Kirk Gibson. I mean, Kirk Gibson for me, obviously he holds a special place in all our hearts for, being a Spartan, playing football, playing baseball, winning the World Series with the Tigers. But for me, I'm from Waterford, went to the same high school as Kirk Gibson. So anytime Gibby pops up, I feel even a little more prideful of Kirk Gibson and him living still in this area and all he does for the Kirk Gibson Foundation. So love Gibby. A little jealous that wasn't old enough to experience Gibby, the football player. But it is my personal mission because I have seen the jerseys out there. I need a Kirk Gibson MSU football jersey. I just absolutely need it. I think it's one of those fun jerseys that you just you do the double take when you see it. So absolutely love it. So if you have your players, if you're watching, first MSU player you watched that made you kind of fall in love with MSU, or was just your favorite MSU player. If you're watching, you're not an MSU fan. He was the MSU player that you loved, but you hated at the same time because he's just too darn good. The first player that you saw that was just like I don't like him because he's doing mean things to my team. So drop those in the comments. Make sure also subscribe to the channel. We're gaining numbers before the season starts. I appreciate everyone that's subscribed, everyone that's watched the videos. If you're just joining us now, we're just talking about our first favorite Spartans, just guys naming dudes. And it's a fun game to play so far. I've talked about the first few Spartans that I fell in love with. Cedric Irvin, Gary Scott, Plaxico Burress, TJ Duckett, Jeff Smoker. Kind of just that badass quarterback that, it felt like he never did, but it just felt like he was ripping cigs on the sideline, just the way he acted. And then of course, Charles Rogers, just absolute stud. And next we'll get to another fan favorite here, because he was beloved by Spartan fans and more fans in the state. He became the Lions backup quarterback, and that was Drew Stanton. And I think we all fell in love with Drew Stanton. At least I fell in love with Drew Stanton before he even played quarterback, because his freshman year, I believe, is Jeff Smoker. It was Jeff Smoker's senior season. But we're so excited for Drew Stanton to be here out of Farmington Hills, Harrison. And he's an athletic guy. We can't wait to get on the field. We need to get him on the field. Dude was playing kickoff his freshman year. And we had to put an end to it because I think he hurt his shoulder on a kickoff his freshman year, either late in the season or it might have been a bowl game in 2003. But like that guy was just. And then when he took over the starting quarterback, the man put it all out there. Mobile quarterback, athletic quarterback, and that's the Spartan tough you kind of love to see, of him just trying to scramble, make those plays, dive through them. And I think he was part of the most historic comeback in college football, which maybe we still have some pride over, maybe some shame over, with a 38-point comeback over Northwestern. But Drew Stanton is still a Spartan favorite in everyone's eyes. And then there's a few more players from these teams that I just absolutely loved, and maybe I don't know why. I know why. I have a million reasons why I love them. But the next one is probably a name we haven't heard in a long time because he was only there, he transferred a junior and senior year. And it was probably the last time we felt like we had a good return man for MSU. That's DeAndre Cobb. Like that man would fly. I mean, he had 4 kick return touchdowns in 2 years. And maybe that's why we just all fell in love because like the man was just pure electricity for for MSU. And as a running back, he did okay. His senior year he had 700 yards, but it was kickoff that he really made his mark for Spartans. And then there's one more man, and I just had to look him up real quick because it just sparked like talking to that time era of Drew Stanton, DeAndre Cobb. I have to throw a receiver in here, and that's a man that I don't know what happened to this person, but Ajim Shabai, war number 2, was there from 02 to 04, had that big sophomore season, 700 yards, 5 touchdowns, but it was just like that's slot type receiver, and like just absolutely was in love with Ajim Shabai. And years ago, I used to work with Sean Belegian on a radio show, and we had this computer that I shared a screen with them. So for the backgrounds, I would just put random athletes as like a rotating background just to catch them off in the middle of the show. And I remember one time I put Ajim Shabai's picture on the background of the computer, and he's talking, makes mid segment about something. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about. And he just stops what he's doing and just starts laughing. And he goes, "Is that Ajim Shabai on the background of his computer?" I go, "Yeah, what's going on?" He goes, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm just putting forgotten athletes, as the background of the computer." And, that's a guy that I absolutely loved. And yeah, I think you should remember him. It's so it's funny. It's just that, it's been, almost 25 years since the man's played at MSU. It's been about, 6 years since that incident happened. But, Ajim Shabai, like that team of, you get Drew Stanton, you get DeAndre Cobb, and, Ajim Shabai, like, everyone loved Drew Stanton. And you have the Matt Trannons on that team as well. But those are the 2 guys that I loved. And, that transitions kind of the next phase. We're getting to the D'Antonio era now. And before we get into the obvious one, I got to throw a defensive guy on here, and that's Otis Wiley. Otis Wiley now back with MSU, had a couple of picks, but absolutely loved him. I believe he's the general manager of Playfly Sports, MSU's kind of media company that handles all of that. But, Otis Wiley is one of my favorites. But, the real man of the early D'Antonio era was, I think we all thought was going to win the Heisman, especially his senior year in 2008. And that's Javon Ringer. Dude had 22 rushing touchdowns, 1,600 yards, and was just an absolute stud. It felt like he was the fastest man on the field, and All-American. So he obviously was, one of the best running backs in college football. But, out of his first, 8 games, had six games over 100 yards, had the back-to-back 200-yard games against Florida Atlantic, and then going for 200 against Notre Dame. Almost went for 200 against Michigan, went for 194. And I just, even looking at his numbers now, I'd have to look back at the Heisman year of 2008, but like, why wasn't Javon Ringer up there with the Heisman Trophy people? it feels like a complete farce at this point that Javon Ringer wasn't. I'm looking at it. That was the Sam Bradford year of 2008, and Javon Ringer finished 10th in Heisman voting that year. So, but I mean, absolutely. I mean, even now we still think of Javon Ringer and one of the best Spartan running backs of all time. And I've brought up some great ones today with Cedric Irvin, TJ Duckett, but that kind of ushered us into the era of, the great Mark D'Antonio runs, and back to that 2008 Heisman race, Javon Ringer finished as running back second in the Heisman race. Sean Green of Iowa, that dude was a stud, finished sixth in the voting. That was Sam Bradford, Colt McCoy, Tim Tebow, and the Graham Harrell, Michael Crabtree, those Texas Tech teams. But Javon Ringer, especially for us millennial fans, like that was the early adulthood that is kicked off the Spartan run that we all got to enjoy with Coach D and Coach D'Antonio at the helm, and put us on the right track. So absolutely, those were my guys. So I'll recap again. I'm just naming my favorite Spartans growing up. First favorite Spartans. We had people chiming in that watching Kirk Gibson when they grew up playing, and at least for my son now, who's turning 9 this year, I made sure he was a little young to appreciate Kenneth Walker, but he's seen enough Kenneth Walker highlights that Kenneth Walker's his favorite Spartan, and it's those guys that you just watch. And it's a shame now because as much as he loves Kenneth Walker, my son was a big Aiden Childs fan. Last year got him an Aiden Childs jersey, and then it still took many months after the season for the news to break to him that Childs actually transferred away, and that the jersey has doesn't mean as much anymore. But those are the players now. It's tough for the fans growing up now, is that you see these favorite players and they could be gone rather quickly and coming into your stadium as opposing fans. But I was lucky enough, for my first favorite Spartans, I mentioned Plaxico Burress, Gary Scott, Cedric Irvin, TJ Duckett, Jeff Smoker, Charles Rogers, Drew Stanton, DeAndre Cobb, Ajeem Shabai, Otis Wiley, Javon Ringer. There's some others in there, like Julian Peterson, Sir Darian Adams. Was it Johnny Adams, the cornerback, number 5? Like, I could be sitting here all day naming just MSU players I love, but these were the guys that, through my formative years as a sports fan and as a young MSU fan, that's what made me come back for more. It's maybe why I wanted to, cover Michigan State football. It's why I'm here on the Voice of College Football Network doing Michigan State Spartans Live. It's because watching these players made me fall in love with MSU and want me to keep going back and, have the chance to tell these stories for everyone and hear what players you guys loved, growing up during those formative years. So that's going to be it for today. We'll come back next week. We're going to try to get a guest next week. We may talk a little recruiting, see how that's going for Pat Fitzgerald. So I'm going to try to book that next week. So that'll come Tuesday or Thursday, but we'll be back next Tuesday. That's going to be July 21st. We'll be back 9 p.m. Of course, you can watch our shows right here on our YouTube channel, Michigan State VOCFB. It's the Voice of College Football Network. Of course, you can follow the Voice of College Football Network on Facebook. Our shows stream live on there as well. You can follow me on X, as you see it scrolling on the bottom line right now, at RyanEL_Key. Start getting the TikTok up and, putting some of the segments up there. So just keep following along, and we're inching closer to college football season. We are 50 days out from game day. 50 days. It seemed like forever ago that It was 100 days. Now we're down to 50. And, it's beautiful. At Spartan football is just a few short weeks away from being back in our lives. So we'll be back Tuesday, 9 p.m. Thank you all for watching Michigan State Spartans live here on the Voice of College Football Network. Go Green.